The gavel cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. The sound sliced through the silence, bounced off the marble walls, and settled heavy on the shoulders of everyone inside. Judge Henry Wallace didn't flinch. He sat tall behind the bench, his face stone cold, his robe hanging stiff like armor. "Order," he barked, his voice echoing down to the trembling figure standing before him, a young black woman in handcuffs. Her wrists looked too small for the cold steel that bound them. 19 years old, her name was Aisha. Her breath was shallow, her chin lifted but trembling, her eyes locked on the floor as though the tiles were the only safe thing left in the world. He'd seen her kind before, or so he told himself. Protesters, agitators, kids who thought noise could change the world. She stood accused of inciting unrest, a peaceful rally that had spun into chaos when police moved in. He looked at her not as a person, but as a problem. Another name on a docket. Another reminder of how this city refused to stay quiet. "Young lady," he said, his tone dripping with authority, "you think the world owes you something because you shout in the streets." Aisha's eyes lifted, slow and steady. Her voice came soft but sure, trembling at the edges. "No, Your Honor," she said, every syllable careful. "The world already took too much." The courtroom went still. Her words hung in the air, heavier than truth, sharper than defiance. They cut through the noise in his head, through the years of rulings, convictions, dismissals. For the briefest moment, something inside him flinched. He didn't know what it was. A tremor, a memory, a name. But then, as quickly as it came, he pushed it down. 30 days in county, he pronounced, voice clipped and cold. The bailiff stepped forward, chains rattling like punctuation marks at the end of injustice. A collective gasp spread through the room. Someone whispered, "She's just a kid." Another muttered, "For what?" holding a sign, but Judge Wallace didn't look up. He stared at the papers before him like they held the moral clarity he'd long since lost. The gavel came down again, one final strike to seal her fate. As Aisha was led away, her wrists bound tight, she turned. Just once. Her eyes met his, and in that split second, the courtroom disappeared. Time folded in on itself. The air shifted. There was something in her gaze that pulled him apart from the inside out. Rage, yes. Hurt, yes. But beneath that familiarity, recognition, a mirror he hadn't looked into in decades. He froze, his hand went slack. The pen slipped from his grip and rolled off the bench, hitting the floor with a hollow tap. He didn't hear the bailiff's voice, didn't hear the murmurs from the gallery. All he could see were those eyes, deep, brown, and full of something ancient. 20 years peeled away in an instant. He was no longer Judge Wallace, the man in the robe. He was Henry, 25 years old, standing outside a hospital room under flickering fluorescent lights. A nurse whispering she didn't make it. A young black woman crying, holding a newborn wrapped in a white blanket. He remembered her name now. Tara, the love he walked away from. The woman whose letters he never answered. The one who said, "You'll forget me, but she won't forget you." The courtroom came back into focus. The noise, the shuffling, the sound of Aisha's chains clinking as she disappeared behind the double doors. He swallowed hard, but his throat was dry as sandpaper. He looked down at the docket again. Aisha Daniels. The last name hit him like a confession whispered by time itself. Daniels, Tara Daniels. He blinked, his vision blurring, the letters bleeding together until they were nothing but ghosts. For the first time in years, Henry Wallace didn't feel like the man in control. He felt small, powerless. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in, the portraits of past judges staring down from above as if demanding judgment of their own. His chest tightened, and he could feel his pulse hammering against the robe that once made him feel untouchable. He whispered under his breath, too quiet for anyone to hear, "No, it can't be." But deep down, he knew, the resemblance wasn't imagination. Those eyes weren't coincidence. The same shade of brown, the same fire that Tara had, the same defiance that once drew him to her like gravity. As the sound of the door closing behind Aisha echoed through the courtroom, he felt a sharp sting in his chest, guilt, maybe, or recognition, maybe both. He tried to focus on the next case file, but the words swam in front of him. State vs. and then nothing. He couldn't read, couldn't think. His mind was somewhere else, in a small apartment 2 decades ago, where a young man once made a choice he thought he'd never regret. He remembered Tara standing by the window, rain tracing down the glass, her voice shaking but steady. "You think the world's gonna protect you if you walk away from who you are," she'd said. "One day you'll wear their suit, say their words, and call it justice. But it'll eat you alive, Henry." He had left anyway, chose ambition over love, silence over truth. He told himself he was doing what he had to, that he could build something from the inside, change the system from the bench. But somewhere along the way, he stopped changing anything. He just became part of the machine. Now, staring at the empty spot where Aisha had stood, he realized the machine had come full circle. The gavel that fell today didn't just sentence a young woman, it condemned him too. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the tall courthouse windows like a rhythm of consequence. People filed out, whispering about the unfairness of it all. "She was fighting for clean water," one woman said. "They punished her like she was a criminal." Henry heard it all, every word slicing into him. He rose from the bench, his knees weak. "Recess," he murmured, though court was already dismissed. He stepped into his chambers, shut the door, and leaned against it like the weight of decades pressed against his spine. His reflection in the mirror above his desk looked foreign, a tired old man hiding behind principle. He tried to breathe, but the air felt thick. He whispered again, "Aisha Daniels," letting the name roll off his tongue like an apology too late to matter. For the first time in years, Judge Wallace felt afraid. Not of scandal, not of exposure, but of facing the truth that justice without compassion was just another kind of cruelty, and that maybe the girl he'd just sentenced was the only person left in this world who could make him see that. He turned toward the rain-streaked window, his reflection dissolving in the glass. Somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, Aisha was being driven away, her eyes still burning in his memory. And though he didn't know how or when, Henry Wallace felt the shift, the first crack in a life built on silence. The gavel had fallen, but for the first time, he wondered if it fell on the right soul. The rain hadn't stopped since the gavel fell. It beat against the tall courthouse windows like time itself was trying to wash something away. Judge Henry Wallace sat alone in his chambers, the lights dim, his robe hanging from the back of the chair. Before him lay a single manila folder. Aisha Johnson, 19, arrested for protest-related misconduct. He'd read those words a dozen times already, but it was the next line that broke him open. "Mother, Maya Johnson." His hand froze. The pen slid from his fingers, hitting the desk with a soft thud. His chest tightened as if someone had reached inside and squeezed. Maya. Her name alone was enough to drag him back into a past he'd spent 20 years burying under titles and verdicts. He closed his eyes, but the memories came anyway. Maya's laugh, the way she'd always touch his wrist when she wanted him to listen. The night she'd stood on his doorstep, tears streaming, whispering, "You don't have to hide who you are to be great." He'd believed her once. But when the world demanded that he become Judge Wallace instead of Henry, respectable, polished, neutral, he'd chosen ambition over love, chosen the robe over her. And now, the daughter of the woman he abandoned stood in his courtroom, looking at him like a stranger. He turned the folder around, as though flipping the page could undo what he'd done, but all it did was make the silence louder. He saw her mugshot again, Aisha's defiant stare, that same fire in her mother's eyes. It felt like judgment had finally come home. He reached for the phone, his voice low but firm. "Reevaluate the Johnson case," he ordered. The clerk hesitated, saying it might take time, forms, approvals, protocol. The system moved slow, too slow. He hung up before she could finish. That night he couldn't rest. His conscience rattled louder than the rain outside. Sleep wouldn't come, so he did something unthinkable for a man like him, something human. He grabbed his coat, left his office, and drove through the storm to the detention center. The guards looked at him strange when he walked in. A sitting judge didn't belong in a place like this after hours, but his badge of authority opened every door. They led him down a narrow hallway that smelled of bleach and loneliness, the walls damp and cold. Each step echoed with guilt. He could hear distant voices, a woman crying softly, the clang of metal doors. And then he saw her. Aisha sat on the edge of a steel bunk, her hair pulled back, her eyes hollow but sharp. She didn't rise when he entered. She didn't even flinch. She just looked at him with the quiet rage of someone who had already decided the world owed her nothing. "What do you want, Judge?" she asked, her tone flat, but beneath it, a tremor of distrust, the kind that comes from a lifetime of being unseen. He hesitated, the words felt clumsy in his mouth. "I wanted to understand," he managed. Her laugh was bitter, short, and sharp. "Understand what? What it's like to be judged before you're known," she shot back. Her voice filled the small room, cutting through the thick silence. He tried to meet her eyes, but couldn't hold the stare for long. Every word she said felt like a mirror, showing him the man he'd become, the man who'd traded empathy for order, justice for distance. "You don't know me," he whispered. "You're right," she said, standing now. "I don't, but I know your type. Men who say they want to help, but only when it makes them feel righteous." Words hit harder than she knew. He wanted to tell her that he once knew her mother, that he once held her as a baby, right after Maya gave birth, that he'd looked down at that tiny face and seen hope. But then he'd walked away, afraid of what the world would say about a young black lawyer in love with a woman the system called too loud, too poor, too radical. He'd convinced himself he was protecting his future. But now, looking at Aisha, he realized he'd been protecting his cowardice. "I knew your mother," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. Aisha froze, her eyes narrowed. "What did you just say?" He swallowed. "Maya, I knew her years ago." A silence fell between them, not empty, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Aisha crossed her arms, jaw tight. "Everybody knew my mother," she said. "She fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She was the reason they built that community center on 12th Street, the reason I ever believed change was possible." "She believed in people," Henry murmured. "Yeah," Aisha said, "even the wrong ones." He flinched, hearing the unspoken accusation. She didn't know how true her words were. He wanted to reach out, to confess everything, to beg forgiveness. But the fear of rejection anchored him. What right did he have to claim connection now, after letting the system crush her, after sentencing her like she was nobody? Outside, thunder rolled. The rain grew louder, spilling down the barred window like tears. The guard glanced through the small glass panel on the door but didn't interrupt. Henry's hands shook slightly as he pressed them together. "Aisha," he began, "your case, it wasn't fair." "I don't do that," she interrupted sharply. "Don't pity me. You had your chance to do what was right. You didn't." The truth strung. There was no defense. He'd spent his life telling others how to face consequence, yet here he was drowning in his own. He nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I didn't." For the first time, her anger softened, just slightly. Maybe it was the way he said it, not like a judge, but like a man stripped of everything that made him important. She sat back down, her voice quieter now. "My mom used to say some people are ghosts. They walk around pretending they're alive, but really, they're just haunted by what they left behind." Henry felt his breath catch. "She said that." "All the time," Aisha replied. "She said if you ever see one, don't hate them. Just pray they find their way home before it's too late." He couldn't speak. The words hit him like a sermon he didn't deserve to hear. He looked at Aisha, this young woman who carried her mother's spirit, her defiance, her light. And in that moment, he realized he'd spent his entire life as a ghost, haunting courtrooms, haunting laws, haunting memories, never living, never loving, just existing behind a title. The guard signaled that time was up. Henry rose slowly, his knees heavy, his throat tight. Aisha didn't move. She just stared at him as he turned to leave. "Judge," she called out quietly. He stopped at the door. "Why are you really here?" she asked. He looked back at her, eyes glistening. "Because your mother's voice won't let me rest," he said. "And tonight, I finally heard it again." She didn't respond, just watched him go. As the metal door closed between them, Henry felt the sound echo through his bones. Outside, the rain came harder, washing the streets clean, but not him. He walked back to his car, his reflection blurring in every puddle he passed. For the first time in 20 years, Henry Wallace didn't feel like a judge. He felt like a man trying to atone for something he could never undo. And somewhere in the darkness behind him, Aisha sat on her bunk, whispering to the ghost of her mother, "He came, Mama. After all this time, he came." But neither of them knew that was only the beginning. A week had passed, but for Henry Wallace, it felt like a lifetime. The courthouse buzzed as it always did, shuffling papers, echoing footsteps, murmured voices, but none of it sounded the same anymore. Every word he heard reminded him of her. Every sentence he spoke tasted like guilt. He'd sentenced his own daughter, and though no one else knew it, that truth sat in his chest like a stone too heavy to breathe around. Then came the call. Aisha's attorney had filed an appeal, armed with new evidence, cell phone footage from another protester, shaky but clear. In the video, Aisha wasn't shouting violence, she was trying to stop it. She stood between chaos and peace, pulling people away from confrontation, shielding a woman from tear gas. When the footage ended, Henry sat motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes damp. The system he had trusted, the one he had helped build brick by brick, had failed her just as it had failed her mother years before. By the next morning, the charges were dropped. The state dismissed the case in light of new evidence. But there was no celebration for Henry, no victory, only the echo of her last words in the detention center, "Understand what it's like to be judged before you're known." Now he did. He knew it in his bones. He'd judged his own blood. That evening, the courthouse lights dimmed one by one as staff clocked out and left. But Henry stayed. He couldn't go home, not yet. Not until he faced the truth he had buried under decades of denial. His hands shook as he picked up the phone and dialed the number Aisha's attorney had left in the file. When she answered, her tone was wary. "Judge Wallace." He hesitated. "It's Henry," he said softly. "Could you tell Ms. Johnson I'd like to speak with her just for a few minutes?" There was silence on the other end, then a quiet sigh. "I'll ask her." An hour later, a knock echoed through his office door. He rose slowly, the weight of years pressing on every movement. When the door opened, Aisha stepped inside. She wasn't wearing cuffs anymore, just jeans and a worn hoodie. Freedom looked good on her, but the way she looked at him made clear it wasn't forgiveness she carried. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice trembling more than he wanted it to. "I didn't come for you," she said sharply. "I came because my lawyer said it might help my record stay clean." He nodded, accepting the blow. "I understand." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain against the tall windows filled the silence, same as the night he'd first read her file. Finally, he took a deep breath and said the words he'd rehearsed 1,000 times, but still wasn't ready to speak. "Your mother, Maya, I knew her." Aisha frowned, arms crossing over her chest. "Knew her or left her?" The air shifted. The silence that followed was louder than any gavel he had ever struck. It pressed against his chest, demanding truth. His lips trembled. "I didn't know you were mine," he whispered, "but I should have looked." Her eyes widened, disbelief and rage colliding all at once. "What did you just say?" "I'm your father," he said, the words barely leaving his throat. "I didn't know, but that doesn't make it right. I walked away from your mother when she needed me most. I told myself it was for my career, for my future, but it was cowardice. I turned my back on both of you." Aisha stood there frozen, the air heavy between them. Then, like a dam breaking, her voice cracked. "You judged me," she said, her tone trembling, "like the world always does." He felt his chest collapse under the truth of it. No defense, no robe to hide behind, just a man standing in the ruins of his own choices. "I did," he said softly, "and I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Aisha shook her head, her hands trembling. "All these years, I thought my father was dead. That's what Mama told me. She said he was gone not by choice, but because the world took him. But you weren't gone, were you? You just left." He stepped closer, his eyes wet. I was scared, he said, scared that loving her would destroy everything I thought I was supposed to be, scared that the world would see me differently. I thought I was protecting something, but all I did was lose everything that mattered. Aisha turned away, packing near the window, her reflection blurred by raindrops. You had a choice, she said, and you chose the robe. He swallowed hard. I know. The seconds stretched long between them, the kind of silence that felt like punishment. She wiped her face roughly, refusing to let the tears win. You sentenced me without even looking at who I was, she said. You saw another angry black girl and thought you knew my story. I saw what I've been trained to see, he admitted. And that's my shame. I became part of the same system that breaks the people it should protect. She faced him now, eyes burning. So what now, Judge Wallace? You think saying sorry fixes it? He shook his head. No, nothing fixes it, but I don't want to hide from it anymore. I don't want to hide from you. His voice cracked, the formality slipping away. Let me make it right, not as a judge, as your father. For the first time, his knees gave out, and he knelt before her, a man stripped of power, stripped of titles, stripped of everything that made him feel above the people he once judged. He looked up at her like a man begging not for mercy, but for a chance to be human again. Aisha stared down at him, her breath shaking. Every part of her wanted to scream, to tell him he didn't deserve that word father. But another part, smaller and quieter, heard her mother's voice again. Don't hate the ghosts, Maya used to say. Just pray they find their way home. Her lips trembled. She looked away, eyes glistening. You think one apology makes up for 19 years? No, he said, but it's all I have. He rose slowly, unsure what to do with his hands, unsure what to do with his guilt. She turned toward the door, her back to him. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said softly. I'll wait, he replied, however long it takes. She stopped but didn't turn around. The silence was deafening again, but this time it carried something different. Not anger, not forgiveness, just the fragile beginning of understanding. He watched her leave, the door closing with a soft click. The office felt emptier than it ever had before. Henry sat at his desk, the rain outside blurring the city lights into a smear of gold and grey. His reflections stared back at him, not the judge, not the man in power, but a father who had finally faced the blood he once denied. He whispered her name, Aisha, and for the first time it felt sacred. Not a case file, not a number, a name that carried the weight of everything he'd lost and everything he still hoped to make right. And somewhere in the hallway, Aisha paused, her chest rising and falling fast. Tears streamed down her face, but her lips curled into the faintest, most painful smile. You found me, she whispered under her breath, but I don't know if I'm ready to find you back. The rain kept falling, steady and endless, cleansing, but not forgiving. Weeks passed like slow-moving clouds, heavy, grey, and full of reflection. The courthouse that once defined Henry Wallace's life now stood as a monument to everything he used to be. The echoes of the gavel, the weight of the robe, the sound of verdicts falling like final breaths, all of it haunted him long after he turned in his resignation. He walked away from the bench quietly, no cameras, no ceremony. Just a letter left on his desk, and a signature that felt more like a confession than closure. For the first time in decades, he was Judge Wallace. He was simply Henry, a man stripped of titles, standing face to face with the wreckage of his choices. The city outside didn't look any different, but he did. The same courthouse steps he once climbed with pride now felt like a hill of shame. Each one whispered his past back to him, every unjust ruling, every life dismissed with a swing of his gavel. But guilt alone wasn't enough. He needed to do something. He needed to build instead of break. And so, one morning, Henry found himself standing before a small brick building on 12th Street. The sign above the door read Maya Johnson Community Center. Her name, her legacy. Inside, the walls were painted with color and hope, murals of unity, children laughing in the halls, the scent of fresh paint still lingering. And there, standing near a bulletin board covered in flyers, was Aisha. She looked surprised to see him, unsure whether to greet him or turn away. "You're really here," she said quietly. "I told you I'd try," he answered. He didn't wear a suit this time, just an old button-down and jeans. He looked ordinary, human. For the next several weeks, he showed up every day sweeping floors, sorting donations, helping kids with homework. The man who once passed judgment now passed out water bottles, carrying folding chairs instead of court files. The first few days, people whispered, uncertain what to make of him. Some recognized his face from the news. "Isn't that the judge who?" They'd start to ask, but Aisha would stop them with a quiet glance. "He's here to work," she'd say. And he did. Every day, Henry showed up earlier than everyone else. He mopped the floors before sunrise and stayed after the lights went out. It wasn't about making amends in public. It was about learning in private. Learning how to listen, how to serve, how to exist without power. He watched Aisha lead community meetings, her voice strong, steady, filled with the same fire that once echoed through courtrooms. The same fire her mother had. She spoke about change, not the kind that comes from laws, but from love. Sometimes Henry would sit quietly in the back, listening. Her words would pierce him in ways verdicts never could. "Justice isn't about punishment," she'd say. "It's about restoration, healing what's been broken." He'd lower his eyes, knowing she wasn't just talking to the crowd, she was talking to him too. Then one afternoon, the light poured through the tall windows in long, golden streaks. The air felt calm. The day had been busy, a fundraiser, a food drive, children running in and out. Henry was tidying up when Aisha walked in, holding something in her hands. He turned, wiping his palms on a towel, and saw the look on her face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was something softer, something like peace trying to find its way through pain. She approached him slowly, her voice low. "I found this," she said, holding out a small photograph. He froze. The edges were worn, the colors faded. But the image was clear, Maya, smiling, her arms wrapped around a baby. Little Aisha. Her mother's joy shining through the picture like sunlight that refused to fade. Henry's breath caught. His hands trembled as he took the photo, his fingers brushing the past. "I remember that day," he whispered. "She told me she wanted to name her Aisha, said it meant alive. Said it meant no matter what the world took from her, she'd always keep something living." Aisha's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "She forgave you," she said. His head lifted sharply, confusion mixing with disbelief. "What?" "Before she died," Aisha continued, "she told me you'd find your way back. She said you were lost, not cruel, not heartless, just lost. And one day you'd come home." Henry felt his knees weaken. His throat tightened until he couldn't speak. Tears welled in his eyes, sliding down the lines of his face that no longer looked proud, just tired. "I'm still trying," he whispered. Aisha nodded slowly. "Then keep trying," she said softly. "Not for me, not even for her. Do it for every person you once silenced." The words landed like truth and mercy intertwined. He nodded, his lips quivering with the weight of what he could never undo. She turned to walk away, but before she did, he spoke again, voice trembling. "Aisha, I don't deserve your forgiveness." She paused at the door. "Maybe not," she said, "but you deserve a chance to change. That's what Mama believed in, not saints, but second chances." When she left, Henry sat down at the small wooden desk in the corner of the community center. The photo still in his hands, his tears falling freely now. He looked at Maya's face, that radiant, fearless woman, and whispered, "I'm home." The next morning, he arrived early again. The volunteers found him already sweeping, already working. They didn't call him Judge anymore, just Henry. The gavel that once sat proudly on his office desk now rested in the back drawer of a filing cabinet at the center, buried beneath boxes of donated clothes. He'd kept it not as a reminder of power, but as a relic of pride. Sometimes, when no one was around, he'd open that drawer, look at the worn wooden handle, and close it again. silently promising never to raise it against anyone again. The world outside the center still moved at its usual pace, injustice, noise, headlines, but inside something sacred had shifted. The man who once punished without understanding was now learning how to serve without recognition. Aisha watched him from across the room one evening, watching the way he bent down to tie a child's shoe, the way he laughed with a single mother struggling to fill out job forms. He wasn't perfect. He still carried the past in his eyes. But he was trying, really trying, and that mattered. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the light poured through the windows again, golden and forgiving. Henry sat on the steps outside the community center, watching the neighborhood come alive, kids playing, people talking, laughter filling the air. He smiled through tears, the photograph of Maya and baby Aisha resting in his hand. For the first time in his life, he felt what justice was supposed to feel like, not cold, not distant, but warm, human, alive. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come in a courtroom. It doesn't wear a robe or hold a gavel. Sometimes it comes in the quiet moments, in forgiveness whispered across generations, in a father sweeping floors beside his daughter, in love reborn from loss. And as night settled over the city, Henry Wallace finally understood what Maya had always tried to teach him, that love, not judgment, is the highest form of justice.